Hey everybody, welcome to Supplementary video 20.1 to 20.6. We're going to cover everything with chapter 20 here. I'm not going to talk about all of the sections that are in chapter 20. We're not really going to talk about 20.5. Most of the important circulatory pathways are already going to be talked about. 20.6 as well already gets talked about a little bit in other videos. So we're mainly going to focus a little bit or focus in this video on things like the aorta, the branches, and things like that. So if we zoom in all the way on the blood vessels down to the smallest ones called capillaries, we can actually look at the three categories of capillaries. And so those are going to be the continuous, the fenestrated, and the sinusoid capillaries. Okay. Remember that in capillaries, this is going to be where nutrient exchange occurs. So blood has been delivered thanks to the arteries, but this is before it returns back to the heart or through whatever system we're dealing with through the veins here. So if we look at the most common capillary, that's going to be the continuous capillaries. These are going to have also the smallest gaps in between cells of the capillaries, because you got to remember capillaries, especially the smallest ones, are only going to have the tunica intima and only be possibly one cell thick. And so you're going to have little bits of gaps in between cells. And so the smallest ones are going to be the continuous. They're going to allow small molecules to pass through. Then your fenestrated ones are going to have pores that allow slightly larger molecules to pass through. We get a lot of fenestrated capillaries in the digestive system, or capillaries that are associated with the digestive system, so that nutrients can move from your small intestine into the bloodstream. And then the most rare, but the ones that have the largest gaps, are your sinusoid. They sometimes have been described as kind of looking like Swiss cheese because of the major holes that are present through them. They can, in fact, actually let whole cells exit the bloodstream. So here's kind of a picture, your continuous, fenestrated, and then your sinusoid, and you can see just how big those gaps are on the sinusoid capillaries compared to continuous. One other thing we'll talk about is the venous return, just because I think I forget to mention it on the high school portion. Remember that blood being forced out of that left ventricle is traveling to the rest of the body, but it also needs to be able to have the ability to return back to that right atrium. And so in order to do that, you take advantage of physics in a few different ways here. First off, the right atrium, its pressure is almost 0 millimeters of mercury. And remember that things like to move from high pressure to low pressure. And so if that is 0, as long as you have a little bit of pressure elsewhere on your cardiovascular system, you're going to be able to move blood towards that right atrium. You also have skeletal muscle pumps. We'll see a slide here on the next page that as you walk, for example, the gastrocnemius and the soleus muscle are actually going to be pushing on veins. And so when they push on them, that increases the pressure at that area. And so that creates an area of high pressure, and it moves that blood further back towards that atrium. Those veins associated with skeletal muscle pumps also have valves to make sure that blood is able to flow in the correct direction. And then if it tries to flow the other direction, the valves shut and keep it from doing so. As you get near that right atrium, kind of towards in the thoracic cavity, very near that heart, when you inhale, your chest gets bigger. That decreases the pressure in the thoracic cavity. So that actually gives you a little bit of extra low pressure area to get blood from your abdomen into your thoracic cavity. And then exhalation is going to increase the pressure because your chest is closing. So that builds the pressure, and that is going to help move it from the thoracic cavity finally into that right atrium. So here's a picture of what that skeletal muscle pump looks like here, where the skeletal muscle, the belly of those muscles right here, when they are relaxed, the valves are closed, so blood cannot flow backwards. But when the muscles contract, that squeezes it and allows that blood to continue flowing in the correct direction. Okay, and then the aorta is just one major blood vessel that has several branches off of it that I wanted to talk about. We can look at the branches coming out of the three parts of the aorta. You have the ascending aorta, so that's moving towards the head. You have the aortic arch, which is a really, really beautiful arc. And then you have the descending aorta as it turns back towards your digestive organs. The ascending aorta is going to have the right and left coronary arteries branch off. Remember, those are what are going to be supplying the heart with its own nutrient supply. The aortic arch has three major branches: the brachiocephalic, the left common, and the left subclavian arteries. And then the descending aorta, as it goes through the diaphragm, because remember, it's got to get to those digestive organs, it's going to pass through a hole called the aortic hiatus in the diaphragm. Because it's got to get through, and once it does that, it starts to become called the abdominal aorta. So we can see here, this is where your heart would be attached. You can see that aortic SL valve right there. The right and left coronary artery is going to be branching off that ascending aorta. You'll get the the brachiocephalic artery, which immediately will branch into the right common artery, carotid, and the right subclavian. Here's your left common carotid, and then here's your left subclavian, which is going to turn. Subclavian means below the clavicle, and so that artery actually runs below the clavicle. Okay, so that is supplementary video over basically all of chapter 20. I know we skip a lot of sections in there, but we kind of get pieces of it throughout the high school portion of this class or in other videos. So this is just a little bit of the things that don't quite fit in or maybe get left out from those other videos.